Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have Marlena Robbins, a proud member of the Diné Nation. Marlena is a doctoral student at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health, focusing on interdisciplinary studies, specifically public health and the overlap with psychedelic medicine. Her research is really centered on advancing Indigenous representation in sacred plant medicines, particularly in psychotherapeutic settings on tribal reservation. And as an Indigenous science student fellow at the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, she contributes significantly to the evaluation and improvement of their certification program in psychedelic facilitation. Marlena, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to start with your story. We were connecting. This is the first time that we've had a chance to chat in person, quote unquote, between screens. And you had mentioned that your introduction into the world of psychedelics has really been through psilocybin mushrooms, which I think was a little surprising for me because I always think of peyote and sort of its center point there. So I'd love to hear just your origin story. How is it and why is it that you came to psychedelics and psilocybin mushrooms? What sort of healing and insight and support did they provide for you on your own journey?
All right. Thank you for that question. Well, I am Navajo. I grew up in Wind Rock, Arizona on the Navajo reservation. My family is still there, originally from Crystal, New Mexico, and Fort Defiance, Arizona. My journey into mushrooms was really centered in wanting to heal and, becoming a mother and trying to develop this healthy relationship with my child, and knowing that I had some issues, knowing that there's some unspoken trauma that I wasn't dealing with. And, when we become parents, that trauma gets passed down to our children, whether we know it or not, in different ways, habits, the way we talk to them, the way we treat them, the way we ignore them. And so I really wanted to be a healthy mom and a healthy human being, healthy daughter, healthy sister, healthy woman. And so sobriety was my first step, and really waking up one day and saying, okay, I'm done. I don't want to drink anymore. This substance isn't doing anything for my body, my brain, my child. And then having a healthy support system around me to really make that decision and set it in stone. And learning different ways to connect to our food systems. I had some really great teachers, Zarco Guerrero, Carmen Guerrero. They taught me how to eat, and they taught me how to reconnect to our ancestral food systems, corn, beans, and squash. And so really understanding, what am I putting in my body? What am I putting in my child's body? And how is that affecting our overall relationship to ourselves, and then our families, our clanship systems, and beyond. And so there's this whole journey pre-mushrooms that I feel had to take place in order for me to show up to the mushrooms as ready and saying, I've done all this work. I'm ready to meet you. This is who I am. This is where I am in life. There's some things that I haven't tapped into that I need to go deeper. And I'm asking for this help. And talk therapy was great. I went to counseling. I went to therapy, got to speak those things into existence that I had buried in the back of my mind and talk and bounce it off someone, another human being. But the mushrooms themselves helped me go dig deeper and really uncovered and exposed a lot of things and had me confront a lot of things about myself, my own narcissism, my own habits, my own unhealthy habits, the way I treated my family, the way I treated my loved ones when I was under the influence of alcohol, and just taking this life for granted. So the mushrooms gave me a very hard, strict awakening, and they laid it all out for me. And it wasn't pretty. and it wasn't fun. It wasn't. But at the same time, it was beautiful, and I was able to share that with my mom as well. So that's kind of my origin story.
Tell us a little bit about and please, and you may have to correct me for some of these pronunciations, but the Diné Nation. Tell us about the Diné Nation. Who are these people? The people that you are, that is your lineage.
It's a big question. Well, we are a very proud people. I love where I come from. I love who I am. I love having grown up on the reservation. Despite all of the horrid statistics that tend to plague our identity in terms of high rates of abuse and trauma, addiction, it was an incredible, and still is an incredible space to grow up and experience and witness in terms of the culture, the language, our relationship to land, Diné knowledge systems, and how we develop this relationship over time to each other, to time and space, and acknowledging our clanship systems. And so being Diné, it's really this way of moving in the world and this way of thinking in the world, and our relationality, our relationships to each other, Hozhó and harmony. Hozhó being everything's beautiful, everything is safe and loving and calm. Everything is in balance with each other. Everything is beautiful. And when I was able to sit with mushrooms with my mom, we took a very large dose together, and we had an altar built. We said our prayers, and we're just saying, we got a lot of stuff that our family is carrying. Help us understand it. Help us shift or move through it. And so we had our medicine bags, our family pictures, our medicines to burn. We had water. We had earth from back home. And once the medicine started to take hold, I laid down next to my mom, and she held me, and it was a glimpse into Hozhó. It felt like I was back in the womb. It just felt, I can't describe it. I remember the feeling, but it just felt like pure joy and love and patience and kindness, and getting emotional talking about it. But it was an extremely profound experience. And I thought, that was a first real glimpse of Hozhó, which is always in existence. It's always around us. It's always alive. We just, because of the world that we live in right now with all these different distractions, and we don't always get to tap into it. But this medicine has the ability for us to be there again, and to remember that intergenerational trauma, although it's there's also intergenerational healing. And that, to me, is more, it's significant, it's more profound, it's more, it's a more important focus that we should be remembering and trying to reignite. And it's been dormant for quite some time, and I think these medicines have the ability to reawaken, to bring it back to us.
Can you say the word again?
Hozhó. Mm-hmm.
Hozhó. Yeah.
Oh, no N at the end. It's Hozhó. Hozhó.
Hozhó. Hozhó. Okay. So you have this experience of the womb of, I'm hearing almost like a sense of deep connection and sort of purity even, and love. And there are a lot of people, as we know, who have been waking up to the power of psychedelics these last several years, yet very few people have chosen to commit to it as a researcher in particular. So I think the story of you and what you're bringing into the world now and what you're attempting to understand is fascinating for that very reason. Why is it then that after these experiences that you've had with mushrooms that you didn't just say, okay, these personal experiences were great and they've been helpful, but no, you made a choice and a decision to further pursue them, to better understand them, to really take a stand for how powerful they could be, from what I understand, in particular for the healing of Indigenous communities. Why is it that you made that choice? Why is it that you've committed to this path, which I can imagine is not easy? There's a level of challenge and arduousness to it.
Right. And I think that's what it means to be Diné, to be a part of a tribe, to be a part of a Indigenous sovereign tribal nation, is that we are always, at the core of this work, we are always thinking of our families, where we come from. How do we bring this education, this knowledge back so that we can help our people heal and speak their truth and walk in their truth and walk in their purpose? And so going into public health, it didn't come overnight. I knew that, and I didn't know that it was a commitment at the time. It was more so I had this incredible experience that reconnected me back to my mom. And I want to continue doing that with my sisters, with my aunties, with my uncles, my grandmas, my grandpas, my child. And so how do I build a knowledge system that, how do I bring this knowledge together so that my family and my communities can learn and experience it too? Because that's sharing the medicine, that's sharing the healing that comes from these medicines, but there's the tools that we need to navigate that process as well. And so building the toolkit and building the tool shed to do that. And so I think, learning how to cultivate mushrooms, learning how to make microdoses, just diving into the history with Maria Sabina, with the Mazatec culture, how mushrooms have evolved and expanded our consciousness thousands of years, and sharing that knowledge with my family, ultimately to heal Native family systems. And then my dad, he was diagnosed with stage 4 liver and gallbladder cancer. And at the time I was reading Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, and he was talking about end-of-life cancer anxiety, end-of-life psilocybin-assisted therapy for that anxiety. And I was able to talk to him. He didn't do it, but it was the fact that he had it as an option, because a lot of his generation are being diagnosed with cancer from having been exposed to uranium mining radiation on the Navajo reservation at very young ages, between the years of 1951 to 1958. And so there's this medicine here that is being used to help people transition and to help them accept this new journey that they're about to embark on. And it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be, it's work. Nonetheless, it is work, but there's a support system around it. And when we think about this transition, how can we develop a healthier perspective of it? And these medicines have the ability to help us do that. And that's ultimately, in the end, what I wanted for him. He did share a lot of anxiety with me, but we supported him the best way we could. And I was like, Dad, I'm excited for you. You're about to embark on this whole new journey, and you're about to travel the multiverse. And we're going to be right here. So that is such a profound experience for our family. We all transitioned with him into our new roles. And into matriarchs of our family and having to gather this new information so that we can guide the future generations that are coming in, and our children. And that transition really helped me find my path towards this program and this research, and where I find myself now. So mushrooms changed the entire trajectory of my life. That's how I got here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It kind of brings everything full circle for me, at least with the time that we have, because I would love to go deeper into it, and I do want to hear more about this research. Like what is the focus of your research? Let's start there. What is the focus of your research? What questions are you asking, and what are you exploring as part of your doctorate program at UC Berkeley?
Right. Well, this research has taken many different shapes, and it's changed a lot. It's gone from multi-generational perspectives of psilocybin mushrooms. It's gone to building educational frameworks for family systems to have a healthy understanding of what psychedelics are in tribal communities. And so my qualifying exam chair, Dr. Steph Bertozzi, who's doing a lot of work with Dr. Elliot Marseille, who's also a DRPH alum, on the cost effectiveness of group therapy and group psychedelic assisted therapy. And so he's helped me. He basically reshaped my he's also the former dean of the School of Public Health at Berkeley. So he knows kind of the ins and outs of the trajectory that we send our students on after graduation. And so he sat me down and he asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years? And I said, I want to advocate for tribes. I want to advocate for Native communities to access these medicines and to have a legitimate voice at the table when it comes to cultural appropriation, misappropriation, legalization, decriminalization. I want to be that kind of bridge or that connecting factor of gaining access for tribes. And so he shaped my prospectus, and we said, policy analysis, a program evaluation, and health systems adaptation paper. So there's 3 aims that we have to do. We have to write 3 papers, and it's looking at culturally centered psychedelic assisted therapy for Indigenous health systems. And the first one being policy work and using Eugene Bardark's Eightfold Path, the policy analysis, to look at SB 58 in California, SB 1012, and building a comparison between Oregon's Measure 109 and SB 23, the Natural Medicine Health Act in Colorado, and just trying to see what works, what doesn't work, but also applying an Indigenous critical lens to this policy analysis and trying to question how are Indigenous communities, how are Native communities being included in these measures or in these acts? How are they being, in these bills, how are they being excluded? How can these frameworks be adapted to be implemented in Native mental health care? And so that goes into the second and third aim, the second and third papers. The second paper, and this is all partnering with community partners and making sure that these different stakeholders are being, their perspectives and their voices are being integrated into this research, conducting interviews. So legal experts, policy analysts, tribal leaders, really asking, have they at any point been engaged by this psychedelic movement for their expertise? And have they been able to inform any of these psychedelic bills or legislation, any of these measures? And then it goes into the second part of this is the program evaluation and seeing what's already out there. So similar to the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics Facilitator Certificate Training Program. It's a mouthful. But I've been working with them, and they're not a part of this research, but I've been working with them for 3 years and evaluating the modules, evaluating the different cohorts, and just seeing people's reactions to the material that's being taught. And so this would work with a community partner. I don't want to say their name because it's not official, but they've done incredible work, and I would absolutely love to partner with them. They've done research in Canada with the First Nations using ketamine-assisted therapy. And they did the preparation work, the journey, and then the integration within a Western mental health care model, Western therapy, but integrating Indigenous knowledge systems. So they brought in medicine people from that First Nations community, brought in the medicine, songs, ceremony, prayers, the language, the food, the representation. And so the community that went into ketamine group therapy together, they were able to hear their language, to hear their prayers being said, to hear their songs being sung, to smell their medicines being burned, or to drink their medicinal teas, or eat their traditional food system, their traditional foods. And then afterwards, they talked about just how this experience rebuilt their trust in each other as a community. It helped them understand their trauma, helped them understand their boarding school trauma, helped them transcend certain traumas, and that they wanted it to be shared with the rest of their community. They wanted their community to come in and experience this too. And what I appreciate about this program is that they don't require people to take the medicine. They can go in and just experience it in community and show up and experience the same effects that the rest of the group is having. And so what does that look like? So this program evaluation would be talking to the different alumni who have gone through the training program and what they've learned, what they feel could have been better, how what they learned is put into practice. They're different, like clinicians, therapists, chaplains, counselors, and that would be conducting interviews with them. The quantitative side to it would be looking at the pre and post surveys. Pre and post is be a secondary data analysis looking at the pre and post surveys that were conducted with participants who went through the actual therapy and their mental health indicators for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and kind of trying to see a correlation between the integration of Indigenous cultures on their mental health, their mental health indicators. So that's, sounds like a whole other dissertation, but that's only the second paper. On the third paper? There's a third paper. It's ambitious, but I love the direction that it's going because it informs each other. The third paper is a health systems adaptation paper, and it uses implementation science the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, which is CFR, and it analyzes a Native American health center that supports underserved populations and sees if that center is ready. It kind of lays out a projection for the center and says, is that center ready for the incorporation or the implementation of psychedelic assisted therapy? What are their stakeholders think? What do their counselors, their therapists think about psychedelic assisted therapy? Looking at their patients and their patient base, the caregivers, traditional healers. Is this something that this center would potentially want? And it's really putting that autonomy back into, the autonomy into the center's hands, and not imposing psychedelic assisted therapy as this great intervention. It's just saying, hey, it's an option, and there's other people who are benefiting from it out throughout the country, throughout the world. Is this something that Native American mental health systems would want to start integrating into their practices?
Well, and what's the balance there between, I suppose, advocacy and enthusiasm and allowing these groups to make decisions for themselves? Because I can imagine, just like in, these sort of these Western healthcare systems, a lot of these doctors, therapists, or decision makers aren't particularly well educated about psychedelics. And once they learn more and have proper education, they come to recognize and realize, okay, this could be a really, useful modality to weave in. And so this is the question that kept coming up for me, because we were talking about these indigenous leaders or tribal leaders, right? Like, how many of them actually have a proper education around psychedelics and can make an informed decision versus making a decision based on stigma or ignorance, or simply just not knowing the sort of research or the history of these powerful substances within indigenous communities.
Right. And that's where education comes in, and these different generations that are out there. Some generations being more exposed to psychedelic education via social media, movies, music, popular culture, and then certain generations still having their stigma of what psychedelics are, having been through the Nixon administration, Christianity, and so that's looking at this other research that I'm still doing analysis on, is the multi-generational perspectives of psilocybin mushrooms, and really gauging this whole, what do people know about psychedelics, but psilocybin specifically? What do they know? What don't they know? What advice do these different individuals who've engaged with these medicines have for everybody else? And how do we use this information to build education that can properly inform our tribal leaders, so as not to say, I guess to bring that information current, like, how are these medicines used in a recreational context? How are they used in mixture with other substances? How are they used in mixture with other medications, the contraindications? And how have they been used across the globe in other cultures with support of different ceremonial protocols and practices? And then where are they at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level? Where are they, I guess, the scheduling right now, and what's happening with, all the news coming out about MDMA, about, so and this is something that I'm working with SAMHSA on. So I did my residency with them, and I helped build a tribal engagement toolkit that laid out the landscape of psychedelic use in tribal communities, the historical context and the contemporary context, and looked at this spiritual use, which is used in a ceremonial, entheogenic a way, the recreational use, which is in mixture with other substances, maybe at a rave, in a social setting, and then conservative use. And conservative use is more so these are very strictly our medicines. We see this a lot with Native American church. They're not for everyone. They are protected. They should remain protected. But then there's also this other conservative perspective of they're dangerous. They will make you go crazy. They're not our medicines. They don't belong to us. And so really building out this landscape of perception and ultimately to inform SAMHSA of how to engage with tribes when talking about psychedelics. And so the extension of that and what that's turning into is a tribal convening, and really inviting tribal leaders, tribal therapists, counselors, stakeholders who have knowledge about psychedelics to the table at SAMHSA and asking them for recommendations, suggestions on how SAMHSA can build an educational framework and start getting this information out to communities.
So one question that's coming up for me is around alcohol, right? And alcohol, from what I understand, is alcohol and maybe even more broadly addiction has been a scourge for Indigenous peoples living on tribal reservations for a long time, really ever since colonization and the decimation and genocide of Indigenous peoples across Americas. And when I was studying some of the history of peyote in particular in the early 20th century in some of these Indigenous tribes and communities, one of the interesting perspectives that I came to understand from studying this is that the individuals who were participating in these peyote ceremonies tended to not really drink alcohol at all. And this was sort of a point that was made to advocate for the use of peyote and in the 1930s to ensure that it could remain legal and available to the Indigenous communities. Is if you actually look at it, those who are participating in these peyote ceremonies were not involved. Really, they did not have the same level of alcohol or addiction or other things like that. And I think what's coming up for me is when we look at how psychedelics have sort of made their way into, let's say, the Western political framework in particular, one of the key aspects has been focusing on the use of MDMA for PTSD for vets, because it's a bipartisan issue. We can all support vets who, are committing 22 suicides a day and nothing else has worked. And okay, this could be finally a treatment that works. What's the nature of the conversation in Indigenous communities and on tribal reservations about this relationship between psychedelics and alcoholism, or psychedelics and addiction? Is that also a bipartisan issue that you notice, folks from across the aisle are getting behind, or is it something that is also, sort of divisive in those communities because psychedelics are perceived as just another drug, like, alcohol is from the West?
I think it could be. I think it has great potential. The more the research is conducted and the more that these clinical trials start, or I guess including people from different ethnicities, different backgrounds. We did at one point have a healthy relationship with alcohol, like pulque, mezcal, Apache corn beer. And these fermented drinks were created for celebration, for community, and they weren't abused. I think that the relationship that we have to alcohol has evolved over time to escape and to forget. And alcohol itself, the way when I was first thinking about sobriety, one of a really good friend, he told me a story because he worked with a lot of medicine people, and a lot of people would come to them and say, having a really hard time with alcohol. Like, I'm drinking all the time. It's hurting my family. It's hurting my loved ones. And so they told him a story that alcohol it comes from death. It comes from fermented plants. And so this spirit, when it comes from a dead spirit, and so when we take it into ourselves, it attaches itself to us, and it starts attracting all of this anger and grief and trauma and debt, loss, and it shrouds us. It shrouds our spirits it starts to harden like an ash. And so when you finally make that firm decision to stop feeding it, it starts to break off. That ash starts to let go and starts to remove itself. That story was one of the driving factors for my own sobriety, and I'm sure it's helped a lot of people understand these relationships that we have, how we perceive these different substances, these different medicines, as having their own, kind of personifying them as a spirit. Just like cannabis. Cannabis has a beautiful spirit, and whenever I sit with her, I talk to her and I say, I need help, and I'm asking you for help. I'm having a hard time. I'm stressed. I'm tired. Usually at the end of the semester, I'll sit with her and I'll tell her, like, this is what's been going on. Is any help you can offer me? I'm here to listen. And then when we've stopped that work, I'll stop using you. I'll stop sitting with you because I won't need you anymore. And I'll come back maybe about a year or 2 years when I really need her, and I'll talk to her again. And so these are the different relationships that that's helped me personally in understanding the mushrooms, and understanding peyote as grandfather medicine, and understanding ayahuasca as grandmother. When we personify these medicines and we give them characters, and we acknowledge their character, we acknowledge their personalities, we acknowledge them as our relatives, then we can really start to implement how we talk about them, how we engage with them in healthier ways and with healthier habits. And so alcohol, even tobacco, the tobacco industry, and how those relationships have been severed and abused over time. Those recipes have been manipulated and rebranded for profit and capitalism. And so we see that with alcohol, we see that with tobacco, and I'm scared to see that with psychedelics, to see that with synthetic, with with synthetic and natural, because they both have spirits, and it's almost like I heard this at the MAPS conference. One of the Mazatec elders was saying how there's this big room with all these tables and businesses and entrepreneurs trying to sell their product. And he was like, it's almost like the mushrooms are being prostituted. And it really, that struck a chord, because what we're headed into is corporadelics, and the capitalization of capitalism, capitalism as a culture. That's, to me, what this so-called United States is embedded with, is capitalism. So that might have gone way off topic.
Well, no, but this is. I think this is a sort of poignant point, and something to double click on in the realm of capitalism. It's capitalism, yes, but I would also argue it's industrialization, and the industrialization of the West particularly the United States in the 20th century with consumerism, right, has led to the destruction of indigenous knowledge, traditional systems, the sort of animate world that is around us. And we are begging for something better, right? So many of us who are advocates for psychedelic medicine, we have this sort of deep intuitive trust that the mushrooms and the mycelial network that the mushrooms exist within is maybe a new system, but we don't yet know sort of what that looks like. And so we're at this very weird juncture where we recognize the value and potential of these, but we're still sort of stuck in the same setting that facilitates a bad trip and has facilitated a bad trip for so many people. And I think that to me is part of the challenge that you're talking to. Even when you mention like, this study that was being done with the First Nations people, and it was done with ketamine, I kind of wanted to like have you go a little bit deeper into that, because it was necessary because ketamine is fully legal and accessible and available, but at the same time, it feels so, I don't know, it just kind of gave me the ick. Like, I mean, I love the potential of ketamine, but it can't hold a light to a lot of these entheogenic substances that we've worked with for thousands of years. And I think what that speaks to is some of the challenge of integration, right? And that's kind of what my next question for you was going to be is, what are some of these challenges in adapting Western psychedelic psychotherapeutic models into indigenous cultural frameworks and values, right? Like, how do we make sure we don't lose the magic of the indigenous traditions by forcing them to adapt to a psychotherapeutic model that is, I think, frankly, broken and not ideal for true healing and connection?
Well, I'm thinking of where I come from. I'm thinking of having grown up and witnessing my addiction within my family, domestic violence, gang violence, and driving through the reservation and seeing almost shells of people and wanting to know. There's this great quote that I came across with one of the theories that I'm working with, is just tribal critical race theory. And it says, there can be nothing but bewilderment and anarchy when a man knows not what his status in his country is. This is especially true when the individual has property interests and matters at hazard in the courts, handled at the initiative of others. And that was Arthur C. Parker, a Seneca intellectual in 1916. So he was talking about the extraction of indigenous knowledge, the exploitation of resources, extraction of resources, exploitation of indigenous knowledge, and colonization, and these genocidal tactics that have taken place to keep indigenous people, native people at bay and secluded, and
domesticated in a way, like overly domesticated, right?
Assimilated, yeah. Christian missionaries, the suppression of our ceremonies, suppression of our languages, boarding school trauma, this whole timeline of colonization and genocidal tactics, whether that's the Indian Removal Act, the Relocation Act from in the 50s and 60s, where they incentivized Native people to leave their homelands to the city. There's this whole evolutionary history that took place with tribal communities, and then the introduction of these Western healthcare models and putting our trust. Like we had our own medicines, we had our own way of taking care of ourselves with our own traditional knowledge systems, and which are maybe more advanced, which are probably way more advanced. I mean, look at psychedelics. And so putting our trust into this mental health care model, this Western healthcare model. And today, knowing that the infiltration of Christianity, the military into our tribal communities, some tribal members may be interested in psychedelic assisted therapy, but don't want to integrate their cultures or indigenous culture systems because that's not what they believe in. And maybe they're more in tune with Christianity or with a different religion or a different spiritual context. So it's tricky. It's we can't say that one size fits all. We can offer it. We can build models that are adaptable, that adopt from other practices that help, that are evolving and are not structured in any one way that's too rigid. And I think that Roots to Thrive in Canada does this very well. Yeah. And that picking and choosing what works, what doesn't work it's a beautiful way to make sure that this therapy is reflective of the communities that it's helping. And that we're constantly evolving this model and adapting it so that it speaks to the people that it's helping. And it's not a one size fits all. So I mean, for me, like when I sit with medicine, I clean my home. I have my altar made. I pull my medicines out. I have my family's pictures. And this one night we put on Navajo shoe songs on Spotify. And it was on Spotify.
It's the perfect representation. I love it.
Yeah. Because they're so far away from home. So I got to hear our language and to hear some Navajo songs. And it was beautiful. And it was exactly what I needed at that time. And yeah, I think Indigenous knowledge systems and kind of building this bridge with Western mental health care models is needed because Western medicine is not going anywhere tomorrow. Like it's a system that we live in. And until we have to build better tools that center Indigenous perspectives, center Native voices, so that they can strengthen their autonomy, strengthen that Native autonomy in their healthcare practices.
And that was sort of going to be my final question. I'm so glad. It's like, how can psychedelics, and maybe I'd be curious to hear about your intentions behind the sort of advocacy for psychedelics. How can these medicines help these Indigenous communities to reclaim that autonomy, to truly feel sovereign once again, and to have what I think is a very important leadership role, not only in their own communities, but I would argue, at a federal level. I would argue maybe even at a global level. My sort of personal opinion on this is what we are crying out for is the reclamation of the Indigenous voice, of animism, of a deep connection to everything that is around us, and my intuitive feel is that psychedelics are helping to facilitate that process. They're helping to remember how important it is that we are in touch with this, de-domesticated aspect of our psyche and our lives.
Mm. Oh, I would love that. I would love to see tribes thriving and building these global relationships for the betterment of humanity and our global brothers and sisters, our relatives across the earth. And I think it starts, one of the areas that I was looking at with my research is the socio-ecological model, and kind of like reverberates out. It, once a person chooses to sit with psychedelics with intention, with the intention to heal, to become a better human being, a better relative, to be of service, to meet the medicine halfway, to put those tools into practice, like being of service, to working out, to eating healthier, to reestablishing our relationships to our food systems. It reverberates out. Our families start to see us growing and getting healthier. Our extended family, our friends, our communities, like, oh, what are you doing differently? And building that tool set so that we can tell them, this is what has worked for me, and what are ways that we can implement this into our communities so that, everyone is benefiting. Everyone is coming to the table. Everyone can eat. And then it goes and extends beyond through the tribe, extending beyond the borders, the political borders that exist, these mental borders that exist within our minds, to our relatives, to the south, to the north, everywhere. That is a beautiful vision that I believe that these medicines have the ability to help us do. Granted, we're meeting them halfway and doing our work and doing our shadow work, because it's not all pretty unicorns and rainbows. It can get extremely hard. It can get very terrifying. And we might call that a bad trip. But that's our realities being shown back to us. And I was at a conference in here at Berkeley, and one of the participants, one of the attendees, asked a question, or he basically said, if some ancestral stuff comes up, some ancestral trauma comes up, he basically said that he chooses not to address it. He chooses not to confront it. He just lets it kind of go by. And he's a white, cisgender male. And he was saying this in response to a panel of women of color who were talking about ancestral trauma and having to confront it through these medicines. And I got to do my presentation. I was like, what a privilege to not have to address our ancestral trauma. What a like, I wish I had that. That the benefits of that. But I don't. And I think that that's the difference with the intentionality of how we choose to sit with these medicines. Indigenous people don't have the privilege of not addressing their ancestral intergenerational trauma. Like, we're doing this healing because we want to heal it, because we see 7 generations down the road. And at this point in time, it's can go either way. We can either make it very beautiful for them, or we can mess it up for them. It's a balance between beauty and chaos. And so as more European Americans come into these medicines, that's the shadow work that they need to do. And that's looking at their ancestors, no matter how hard it is, no matter how terrifying or troubling it is, to acknowledge that we're benefiting from a medicine that has been stewarded by Indigenous people for millennia. And we also need to acknowledge the ancestors that have disrupted those relationships and have committed genocidal, horrific, torturous tactics on the very Indigenous people who have stewarded these medicines. So, do the light work, do the shadow work. It's all beautiful. It's all needed. I'll stop there.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Marlena. Thank you for representing and sharing, and thank you for the research that you're doing and the voice that you have. Thank you for your courage to this work and this advocacy. And thank you for your time and for joining us for the podcast today. It was enlightening and enlivening, and I'm grateful that you were able to join us.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Third Wave, and keep engaging with people and getting this knowledge out there. We need more voices like this, and we need more information and education to be put out. So thank you for putting this together.
Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. The psychedelic space is evolving every day, and we have a ton of amazing content that's coming out, and subscribing is the best way to keep up to date with all of that great content.